Today, we're delighted to be chatting with Jordan C. Morris. And Jordan is the co-writer and producer of the winner of TIFF's People Choice Documentary Award for Mr. Dressup, The Magic of Make-Believe. Jordan, thanks very much for joining me. Lovely to have some time with you.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thanks for asking me.
Now, Jordan, the obvious question off the top, when you heard that you had got the People's Choice Award at TIFF, what was the reaction for you and your team?
It was pretty overwhelming. At that point, we'd already started to get pretty overwhelmed with just the response. But so strangely enough, the biggest exciting moment for us wasn't just winning that kind of accolade. It was being there when it had its world premiere and having the film received by a standing ovation. That was just beyond anything that we'd anticipated. And once that happened, the buzz around the film really started to go wild. So we knew we were maybe a contender for that. But yeah, just the energy of it being in the room, and lots of CBC executives, Amazon executives, a lot of the celebrities that appear in the film were there as well. Members of, the families of contributors to the show were all there. That was probably the highlight of TIFF for me. Not that winning People's Choice documentary wasn't massive, but just having it received the way that it was in the moment was difficult to describe.
I think that's a moment that's going to stay with you for a long, long time.
Yeah, I can guarantee you that.
How did the notion of doing a documentary on Ernie Coombs come about?
Well, I've worked with the director, Rob McCallum, a number of times. We've been really good friends for over 10 years now. And we're constantly talking to one another about projects that we've got going on. And we're both huge fans of children's entertainment, Jim Henson in particular, and the shows that we grew up with. And the subject of Mr. Dressup came up, and we were wondering why we couldn't get to an episode of the show. There were a few conversations that we had, but for some reason you can't watch an episode of Mr. Dressup at the moment, despite the fact that they made 4,000 episodes. So that was kind of one question that we asked, what's going on there? And then taking note of the fact that an entire species of children's entertainment seems to have gone extinct, which is the single host speaking to camera, real people talking to children. And that gentle, kind of really sensitive, slow-paced kind of energy that we grew up with is all but gone. Most of it's now animation and very fast-paced, flashing lights and sounds and all that kind of thing. But there's nothing really out there, or very, very little of anything out there that kids can connect with on a human level. So we started talking about that as well. And then very quickly, it became kind of a conversation like maybe we could do something here. And when Rob tested an episode that we did get to, 12 episodes were licensed to a third party for a few years. And we got one, and he sat his children down. He's got 2 young kids in front of it just to see, well, would this show even work today? And his kids responded to it really positively. And from there, we started to take it a little more seriously and investigate what it might look like and how we might go about it. And that's how we got rolling.
Now, obviously, you needed the approval, cooperation of Ernie's family. What was their reaction?
They're wonderful. I mean, I can say without exception that everyone that contributed to this film and everyone that we spoke to that contributed to the original show are exactly the kind of people that you'd hope they would be. So they were wonderful, but of course skeptical. They'd been approached many times over the years by other people that wanted to do a project, anything from resurrecting the show somehow. We've heard stories about that, just to doing a documentary or some kind of a feature on the show or Ernie himself. So they weren't convinced that it was a good idea. And they certainly weren't convinced that a couple of schmucks from London, Ontario knew what they were doing and could get it done. But in the end, it came down to one conversation that Rob had with both of Ernie's kids that was particularly heartfelt. And I think in that moment, Rob proved that he really loved the source material, loved Ernie, that his life was shaped by that show and everyone that contributed to it, mine as well. And that resonated with them, and that got the conversation going where they allowed us to come in and at least speak to them and get started. And from there, they helped us kind of win over more and more people. And the bigger the list got of people that were getting behind it, the easier it got, the more momentum we had. But you're right, it started with Ernie's family, really.
And Judith Lawrence has an important part in this as well. And of course, Judith performed the puppet characters, Casey and Finnegan, and she was supportive in the process too.
Yeah, Judith is amazing. I mean, she's not a spring chicken anymore, but she is sharp as a tack and very, very. I wouldn't want to contend with Judith Lawrence. Like she is a force to be reckoned with. So it was kind of a no-nonsense conversation with her. And if you've seen the film, then you'll see her being surprised at the impact that her work has had on people. So part of our conversation with her was just about her being surprised that anybody wanted to do it, and then realizing the kind of impact that her work and the show had on generations of Canadians. And again, once we could say that Ernie's family was on board and was supporting the effort, then she came around as well. But she lives on a very remote island off the coast of BC. So our biggest hurdle with working with Judith was just getting to her, because she's not willing to travel anymore due to her advanced age. But we certainly were willing to do it if she said okay, and it worked out wonderfully. And I'm so grateful for having met her. She's awesome.
Well worth overcoming the challenges to do that.
Absolutely.
Now, you had in the co-production CBC and Amazon Studios, and as I watched that, I wondered, from your standpoint, does that complicate the process of producing this kind of documentary?
It certainly can. We didn't really feel it. It didn't affect us in that way. The first big partners that came on board were Marble Media, and that's one of Canada's largest media companies. They're currently merging with Blue Ant Media, so they're even going to be much, much bigger. But once they came on board, because a couple of the people inside there, Mark and Escalus from that company, were also fans of the show, which is, I mean, pretty common, right? It's not very often that you get to work on a project that's featuring an IP that's so beloved by so many people. So as soon as you say we're working on this, people would typically light up and want to know more about it and get involved in the conversation. But once they threw their company behind it, then they helped us negotiate with the CBC, and they helped tee us up with Amazon. And they were really, really, I guess, instrumental in leveling up the production. Right? Again, it was just a couple of us and a very small crew that got started. And once Marble came on board, then it became a much more professional and larger scale product. And then when Amazon came on board, man, it shot up again. And everybody was really on board and supportive of everything that we did. We were concerned about too many cooks in the kitchen and creative control and all that kind of thing, but Marble and Amazon were incredibly supportive. Lots of communicating back and forth, but it was just to keep, I think, the lines of communication open so everybody understood where we were and what the plan was and what our vision for it was. But, very little in the way of pushback. And everything that they wanted was very reasonable, so we were more than prepared to deliver for that. And we're just grateful, because having those companies on board and pushing it made it possible to get into TIFF. Although, again, the IP is so popular, it might have got in on its own. But these are people who have gone and presented, features and other projects to film festivals all over the place and know how to negotiate at that level. Again, a couple of guys like us might have had more difficulty doing it. So we're very grateful. We're very, very grateful. It's not very often that you get to work on something that can almost literally mobilize an entire country. And that made opening doors for us much easier than I think the typical project would.
That's good to hear. Now, looking at the documentary, it's 90 minutes long, and it is not a simple piece of production. As I looked at it, I'm thinking, my goodness, where do you start on a production such as that? Do you do a storyboard? Do you do a script? Does it just have a life of its own? How does this get together?
It's more the third option that you listed there. When you're doing a narrative, you bring the story to the production, right? The script exists and you walk it in and then they start breaking it down, and that's what you use as your North Star for the production. When you're doing a documentary, all you can bring to the production is the history of whatever the subject is that you're working on. And then you start excavating from there. So we knew the show and we had a pretty good list of people that were willing to contribute. So we just started interviewing people, and we interviewed as many people as we possibly could. We've worked on it for almost the better part of 5 years. So we were communicating with people constantly and gathering stories and trying to figure out what the subjects were that we would cover. And it's not always the case, but chronological seemed to work best for what we were putting together. Early on, we had basically an A version and a B version in our minds of what the overall storyline might be. And pretty quickly on, the B version became the one that we focused on. And the celebrities that took part were the last piece of the puzzle that was put in, basically in just the last few months. And the only reason we were limited to the people that we had involved was just the time that we had to put it together. But everybody, again, you phone up and you say, we're doing this thing on Mr. Dressup, would you like to participate? 99.9% of people are, of course, yes, love to. So that was all wonderful. But it really was just talking to as many people as possible and learning as much about how the show was put together, who was involved in it, Ernie's life on the road with the traveling show, and everybody else's kind of story that led them to that show. And from there, we just, I mean, there was 100 hours or something, just way too much that we started to trim down. And
Wow.
there were excellent editing skills involved as that as well, which I'm still impressed by, because I think the film really flows beautifully, and that's not, that's not me as the writer. That's, Rob working with the editor and me chiming in occasionally about that kind of thing. But yeah, we're really pleased with it, and we've just kept uncovering nuggets of gold that we wish could fit into the final cut. But there's hours and hours and hours of stuff that we're trying to find a home for now that we want to share with an audience that just couldn't fit in the final cut. So on social media, if you're following the Facebook page and that type of thing, you'll see clips come out regularly of additional stuff that we couldn't find a home for. And there's talk about DVD extras if there's ever a DVD, and other supportive materials. So lots going on, and we're just doing our best to try to share as much of this adventure with everybody as we possibly can.
Where can people see this additional material? What would they look up on Facebook?
Yeah, there's a Facebook group just known as Mr. Dressup Magic of Make Believe, and you'll find that Marvel Media is posting regularly, and Amazon Prime Video will post stuff on it regularly as well.
Mm-hmm.
So they're coming out in a few different places. Wherever you can find it, just go on any social media platform you're on, basically, and search for Mr. Dressup, and you'll probably find something.
I did a rough count, and there's more than 24 well-known names in the documentary. People who were very moved by Mr. Dressup and had some lovely things to say. Was it difficult coordinating the people, and B, what they had to say? Did this have its own life?
Again, it was the limitation of time only that prevented us from even getting more people involved. And the running time of the film. It's the same problem I was just describing, that we just didn't have a ton of room. But most of the people that we approached were really thrilled to do it. And yeah, everybody was really moved by that show. And it was a really important part of their childhood, typically. So there's a very deep connection that people have with that show and with the character of Mr. Dressup, and obviously the puppet cast as well. So it didn't take much in the way of steering them when we were interviewing them. They had a lot to say about it. Maybe we would prompt them a couple times, but for the most part, it would just flow out of them. And some people, you're right, got very emotional about it when they were revisiting it in their mind. Myself included. Like, we're still moved by the film every time we see it. We can't get out of it without tearing up a little bit as well. And it can be times kind of difficult to talk about what it meant to us and how that show impacted us. So there are Q&As going on after all the festival screenings of this thing, and I'm kind of infamous for breaking down and crying after every one of them, because the show really did mean a lot to me, and I'm so pleased to have had a small part in bringing this out and letting the public kind of revisit it and remember why they were so fond of it as well.
Now, if we can just build on that comment for a moment, and going through the production, I'm sure there were many magical moments in putting it together. Were there any highlights, moments that kind of stand out for you where you go, oh my gosh, I don't believe we just got that?
Sure. Yeah. Again, probably too many for me to talk about even here. Just to reiterate the thing that I said, everyone that we spoke to was wonderful. Everyone was exactly the type of person that you'd hoped they would be. But one of the first highlight that comes to mind was our first trip out to British Columbia to speak with Judith. And because we had a very small crew at that point, it was one of the early days for the production. Rob was manning cameras and kind of taking care of the actual shoot. And it was my responsibility at that point to interview Judith and to interview Casey and Finnegan. So that was a lot. And watching Judith go into a back room and pull out this little leather bag, pull out the puppets, the original puppets, she still has them. They're in great condition. And, you know, because of her age, she's kind of slow to put them on her hands these days. And they would be face down in the last kind of tugs onto her wrists and getting them situated. And then in the matter of just split seconds, they would raise up and come to life. And at the same time, Judith would disappear. It's such a magical kind of thing to witness firsthand in the room with Casey and Finnegan. And then as soon as Casey said hello, I was a mess. I was 5 years old again. It was very difficult to keep it together. So it took a few minutes for me to recalibrate after that and to be able to talk with them. But that was incredible. And those kind of moments would jump out and surprise me throughout the entire process. When we were interviewing Susan Marcus in her living room in the Toronto area, she was a writer on the show. And in an earlier stage of her life, she actually appeared on the show and was one of the young cast members of the show that would appear regularly with Ernie. She just asked me a very simple question: how's it going? And I broke down at that point too, because I'd been experiencing something really strange and haunting, but not in a scary way. We were traveling all over the place, visiting places that Ernie had been to many, many times. And we were talking to tons of people who Ernie had spent years and years and years of his life with. And every time we would show up at a place, it felt to me like the person that we were there to talk with could have said, oh, you just missed him. He was just here. It was so strange to follow in the wake of his life like that. And I was just, when she asked me that question, I was just overwhelmed with the kind of emotions that I've been feeling up until that point. And so I've become the strange man that broke down and cried in her living room. Again, she was wonderful, and we got on with it and made it happen. But those moments were pretty regular for me anyway. And
I'm sure when you saw the final edit, you had the same kind of reaction, because that is a special moment in any production, but it's finally done and you're going to see the final edit.
Yep. And is it going to work? You know, Rob and I, is it working? Are people going to like this? As soon as we decided to move forward, we immediately felt the weight of responsibility. It's like, it's just now our job not to screw this up and to give people what they want, a chance to revisit a friend they hadn't seen in a long time. So that was basically our North Star. That's all we really wanted. We wanted to do justice to the story and to the people involved. We wanted to please Ernie's family and Judith, you know, the people that are still with us that contributed to that show. We wanted to make sure that they felt good about it. And then anything past that is gravy. And to have it be so warmly embraced by such a wide audience was not something that we thought about, but, you know, obviously you hope for.
Now, was the funding, once you got CBC and Amazon Studios involved, was the funding relatively easy to put together for a production of this magnitude?
Incredibly, yes. It's the most difficult thing for any kind of production. It's just to find the money to do it. So we nickeled and dimed our way the first couple of years of came on board and backed it, was on support. We wouldn't have been able to recreate the set the way we did. Spoiler alert, because we didn't really let that out of the bag until pretty late. And there's a whole sequence, again, of additional materials that we didn't have room for, where we invited the surviving contributors to the show, writers, performers, to come to the CBC studios to do another interview. We didn't tell them that the other people were going to be there, that they hadn't seen in decades. And we didn't tell them that we had reconstructed the set on a CBC soundstage, and we just let them walk out onto it and let those memories wash over them and watch them interact with one another. And that's amazing. So there are clips of that sequence now on social media as well. Yeah, back to your question. It should have been very, very difficult, but again, everyone was so excited about it and wanted to take part in it. So they were very supportive. And for us, it didn't turn out to be much of a hurdle at all.
Now, you've been in TIFF and had such amazing success there. Is the documentary going to other festivals? What are your plans beyond this point?
It was submitted to a bunch of festivals all across Canada, so it did most of them. Atlantic International Film Festival, Cinefest up in Sudbury, the Vancouver International Film Festival. There was 6 or so of the highest profile film festivals across Canada that it appeared at and was received very similarly. The team kind of broke into individual little groups so that we could cover all these things because some of them overlapped and traveling would have been tough to get everybody there. So I did Sudbury, I was in Toronto, I did Windsor, Rob did other combinations. He and I were at Windsor, which was a nice bookend for us because there was a while there after it was completed where we hadn't seen each other in a while. So closing out this particular chapter at Windsor together was nice for us. So it made its way across Canada, did very well. And then we weren't aware of this, but other festivals are still asking for it, and we're not sure where it'll go next. But I guess there was a showcase that took place at TIFF that I wasn't even aware of, whereby the second run independent theaters, like the New Yorker would have been in London and the Highland is currently, those theater owners get a chance to look at some of the features that take place at TIFF and choose whether or not they'd like to pick them up too. And that's happening. So at these independent theaters, it's now appearing actually on the big screen, and it is going to appear here in London at the Highland Theaters next month, I believe. I can't remember the date, but look at it. If you're in the area, look at the Highland Theater. If you want to see it on the big screen with a crowd, which is a wonderful way to see it, then I recommend you check that out, or look wherever you happen to be for a local theater like that. They may pick it up as well. We're going to do a Q&A. Rob and I are once again going to come out and talk about the film after the screening at the Highland. After that, I don't know how much more it's going to do as far as appearing elsewhere, because it's now available on Prime Video, which is where its ultimate destination was supposed to be. And it has a global release there. So in every region that you can get to Prime Video, you can watch the film.
That's incredible, incredible. And I would expect that when it's shown in the theater and you come to do the Q&A, you'll be the one that's crying?
Oh, yeah, guaranteed. Yeah, absolutely.
Now, Jordan, you've done just about everything in theater arts. You've been an actor, and you morphed into doing set design and costume design and prop design. You've written scripts, edited and polished scripts, even had a hand in the promotional phase of promoting various projects. So you're pretty skilled in all areas. Either that or you can't hold down a job. You know, one of the two. I'm not sure which, but
A bit of both, maybe.
Can I ask you what it is about writing that excites you so much?
It's the first step in moving people with a story. And so if you don't have a script, you don't really have much. It's not going to have the impact that you hope it would. So I did it in the reverse order of priority. I started performing out at the leading edge of the public's interaction with any kind of storytelling, and grew to appreciate a really strong script because I performed really bad ones and I performed really excellent ones. And you learn really quickly that it takes an excellent script to create that kind of rapport that you want with your audience. If you're going to move people and elicit that emotional response from your audience, you've got to have it down. You need to be able to craft a great story. So I just made my way closer and closer to that and then started experimenting with it without any skills or training whatsoever. And I wasn't any good at it to begin with. But then I started to take it very seriously and trained myself and read every book there is and took on a mentor and worked with him for a year and elevated my skills. And now I'm kind of doing a similar thing. And it's been wonderful.
Yes, you're creative director of the Screenplay Factory. Maybe you could tell us what is that company about?
Well, that is my shingle for instructing. Like I'm a teacher of screenwriting now, but I'm also a coach and a mentor for new and emerging writers who want that constant support and feedback that they may not be able to get elsewhere. Screenwriting in particular is kind of a nebulous skill. And although there are schools out there that teach it, oftentimes the students will move through too quickly and not pick up the deep kind of understanding that they need to be able to be successful. So they'll look for some kind of a mentor to help them out. And it's been absolutely awesome. I love the work that I do and working with new and like I say, emerging writers. COVID was awful, but it forced me online. I'm not much of a bit of a Luddite when it comes to technology, but I was forced online because of that. And now I've got clients in England and Europe and Australia and all through the States. So that's been incredible. I'm really, really grateful for that. Just helping people kind of find their narrative voice and work on those skills as a composer of a story, and then the pagecraft involved in screenwriting as well is a different skill altogether. And it takes a while to learn that stuff. So a quick course here and there probably won't do it. And if anybody's really serious about it, then that's what I'm there for.
Well, it's interesting. I've always thought of people writing scripts that it's a very solitary, lonely kind of existence. There you are with your thoughts and it's going down on paper. And so obviously the Screenplay Factory, as you say, has this mentorship role. And it must be a wonderful release for those you're working with to have someone to bounce off ideas and do the rewrites and kind of sort where the script is going. It must be pretty rewarding on both sides.
I'd like to think so. It's certainly rewarding for me. I have a great time doing it. And although you're right, that's the kind of romantic idea that people have about writers is that they go away to the cabin in the woods or they sit in a French cafe in the corner chair and type away, and then after a weekend come away with their novel or their script. That does not work. That's a horrible plan. You need to share your work often with other people to find out whether or not it's having the effect that you want it to have. There's this loss in translation. You've got the entire story and that whole world up in your mind, and then it's a matter of minimizing that loss in translation as you put it out on paper and share it with people. And that takes time, but you need to know what the response is from other people before you can actually really hone in on that and polish those skills. So don't try to be a creative writer of any kind in a silo and protect your work and worry about people stealing it. Share it openly and often throughout the entire process so that you understand what's working and what's not, so you can improve the things that don't work. There's no other way to success, in my opinion.
Now you're finished with Mr. Dressup, the magic of make believe, and you've got the factory working hard. Are there any projects coming up for you?
I've been fortunate enough to meet a bunch of people in the last couple of years, some of which I've met through this particular project, others just by chance being in the industry. So I'm working with a couple of people on high profile scripts right now. And then I've got a particular project of mine that I've been dragging around for 10 years that I think I might be inspired enough to go after, which I tinkered with for about 8 years. I've done a lot of writing on it. It's just kind of sitting in a corner right now. And it wasn't until I was middle way through this particular project, the Dressup project, that I realized that this thing that I've been working on for years and years is definitely built out of the DNA of Mr. Dressup. I didn't recognize that until I'd seen the finished product and listened to other people talk about how he'd influenced them. Well, he influenced me too. So I've got something that's heavily inspired by the Dressup vibe, not literally the show and how it worked on a mechanical level, but just the type of messaging behind it, the gentleness and kindness of it. And I'd like to spend some time with that. So hopefully in 24, I'll start work on that too.
Well, we'll look forward to the end result somewhere down the road. I know these things don't happen overnight, but somewhere down the road, we may see your name in lights yet again.
I'll do my best.
Jordan, thanks for joining me today. This has been delightful to chat with you. And I was not only impressed with the documentary because I was thinking about how it was put together and what it took to make it as I was watching it. But in those closing minutes, the last 10 minutes in particular, I think, as most other people, I was extremely moved by it. And I think that's a measure of a great piece of work. So you have every reason to be proud. And I thank you for spending time with us today.
Well, thank you for saying that. It's been a real pleasure to chat with you too. And again, thank you for asking me.
Jordan C. Morris co-wrote and produced Mr. Dressup, The Magic of Make-Believe. And it's available on Amazon Prime right now. It's the best 90 minutes you'll spend in a long time.